Ty Gibbs just won at Bristol. 0.055 seconds. Overtime finish. Photo finish. And while everyone is breaking down the win, dissecting the last lap, celebrating the moment, nobody is asking the real question, because the same week NASCAR celebrated that victory, they also made a very different kind of decision on the complete other side of the country. They told Cletus McFarland he does not get the call-up to Talladega. Not enough experience, not ready, not approved. Same week, two decisions, one sport, and one uncomfortable question that nobody in the mainstream coverage wants to touch. Who actually gets to be inside NASCAR? And who gets left standing outside it? Let's be very clear before anyone jumps to conclusions, because this conversation deserves more than a hot take. This is not just about Ty Gibbs, and it's not just about Cletus McFarland. This is about how NASCAR distributes opportunity, because in this sport, access is just as important as speed. Ty Gibbs is a product of the system, built through development pipelines, backed by infrastructure, protected by structure every step of the way. Everything about his path exists inside NASCAR's ecosystem, and NASCAR has had a hand in shaping that path from the beginning. Cletus McFarland is the complete opposite. He built an audience entirely outside of it, millions of subscribers, a motorsport fan base that did not come from traditional Sunday viewing habits or decades of family tradition. They came from YouTube, social media, and viral culture. They found him, not the other way around. So you're looking at two entry points into this sport, one built carefully inside the system over years, and one built completely outside it, with no help from the structure whatsoever. And NASCAR's reaction to both of them in the same week tells you more about this sport than any press release ever could. Bristol is not a normal track. Half-mile concrete, constant chaos, zero margin for error, and tempers that never stay cool for long. And yes, Ty Gibbs executed when it mattered. That part is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged. But here's what actually unfolded late in that race, and this is where you need to pay attention. A late caution reset the field. A strong gap that had been built through genuinely good driving was erased in seconds. Track position flipped, and suddenly the race was no longer about who had controlled it for the previous 100 laps, but who happened to benefit from the restart. Now let's be precise here, because precision is everything in this conversation. This is not NASCAR rigging races. That claim does not hold up, and I'm not making it. But here's what does hold up. Late race cautions at short tracks statistically compress outcomes in ways that disproportionately reward drivers already in strong track position. Restarts at Bristol decide more races than raw pace does. And when you look at which drivers consistently find themselves inside that window at the right moment, the patterns are not random. That is not conspiracy. That is restructure. And Ty Gibbs benefited from that structure at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right race same week. Completely different decision. Cletus McFarland applies for a Talladega start. The answer comes back no. The reason given is experience and safety. And let's be honest, because this argument deserves a fair hearing, that part is valid on the surface. Talladega is genuinely unforgiving. 200 miles an hour impacts. One driver who doesn't read the draft correctly. One person who brakes at the wrong time. And you have a 20-car catastrophe that nobody walked to the track hoping to see. So yes, safety is real. That argument is not fake. But here is where the conversation gets complicated, and this is the part that matters. NASCAR has a long and well-documented history of flexibility in special entry situations when it served a purpose they approved of. We have seen celebrity crossover appearances get greenlit. We have seen promotional entries tied to marketing value move through the process quickly. We have seen drivers enter high-profile events with limited experience under what were described as controlled conditions. The threshold has moved before. It has moved for people who brought something the sport wanted. So the question is not whether safety is real. It is. The question is why the threshold for safe enough shifts, depending on who is standing at the door asking. That inconsistency is what people are reacting to, not the rule itself. The application of it to understand why fans are responding this strongly. You have to understand the precedent this sport has built over decades. Because in NASCAR history, access has never been purely mechanical. There are 3 patterns that informed fans recognize immediately. First, promotional flexibility, where entries and appearances have been greenlit when they benefited exposure, sponsorship dollars, or broadcast interest. Second, development pipeline protection, where drivers inside the system receive structured escalation and second chances even after serious mistakes, because the sport is financially and reputationally invested in their success. And third, outside entry friction, where personalities coming in from outside the traditional structure face longer timelines, higher requirements, and more scrutiny than comparable inside candidates ever did. Again, this is not a conspiracy. This is how most professional sports organizations manage brand risk and protect the narratives they have already invested in. But it creates perception gaps that are wide enough to drive a stock car through. And perception gaps create exactly the kind of controversy you're watching play out right now. Now zoom all the way out, because this is where the real argument lives. NASCAR is constantly balancing two goals that are fundamentally in tension with each other: grow the sport and control the sport. And those 2 goals collide more often than anyone in the front office wants to admit publicly. Because real growth requires unpredictability. Real growth means letting in voices and personalities and audiences you did not build and cannot fully direct. Control requires the opposite. It requires structure, predictability, and the ability to shape every narrative from beginning to end. Gibbs represents structure in its purest form. The narrative is predictable. The branding is clean. The progression follows a path NASCAR mapped out. When he wins, NASCAR controls that story completely. Cletus McFarland represents something the system fundamentally struggles with. His audience already exists and already has opinions that do not depend on NASCAR's approval. His influence does not flow from their permission, and that changes the entire calculation. Because a controllable star does not just win races, they protect the system. They keep the narrative inside the walls, and that is not a small distinction. Inside an organization that has spent decades building a very specific image of what this sport is supposed to look like. Stop for 1 second right here. If this conversation is landing for you, and the fact that you're still watching tells me it is, subscribe right now. This is the kind of analysis you are not getting from the official broadcast partners. New video every single week. Don't miss it. NASCAR has said publicly and repeatedly that it wants younger audiences, digital reach, cultural relevance, and new fan pipelines that can carry the sport into the next generation. Those are not small ambitions, but when organic growth shows up from outside the structure, built by someone they did not create, carrying an audience they did not cultivate, the response is not immediate integration and celebration. It becomes evaluation and requirements and timelines and restriction. And that contradiction is one fans notice instantly, even if they cannot always articulate exactly why it bothers them. You cannot ask for expansion while quietly filtering out the sources of expansion you cannot control. That is not caution. That is the sport protecting itself from the very growth it claims to want. So here is the real question. And I want your answer in the comments right now, because I genuinely want to know where this comment it stands. Not was this fair, not was this safe. The real question is this: when NASCAR is forced to choose between control and growth, which one keeps winning? Because based on this week, based on Bristol and Talladega landing in the same 7 days and pointing in the same direction, Control is ahead, and whether that turns out to be smart long-term strategy or the most expensive mistake this sport has made in years, that is exactly what the next decade of NASCAR is going to tell us. Drop your take below. I read every single one. This conversation needs to be louder than it is.